Yay, this is exciting. So I'm gonna get started. It is 1 o'clock. I'm excited to see how many people are here. This is a CCAR Woodard webinar about coaching young people. I am going to start sharing my screen so we all know we're in the right place. Is this where you are supposed to be? Hopefully you all are here on purpose and this is where you are meant to be today. This is an hour and a half webinar from 1 to 2:30 on coaching considerations for younger generations. My name is Meghann Perry. I'm a person in recovery. I am a recovery coach, professional, and facilitator. I train all of CCAR's curriculum as well as create original curriculum. I work as been a coach for 8 years. I'm also a storytelling and theater educator. So in my time, I've when I first started coaching, I worked with a lot of young people, And then in my other life as a theater and storytelling educator, I've worked with a lot of young people. And so over the years, I've kind of come to figure out that there is a lot that is the same. And then there are some things that are important to consider that are different about working with young people. And when I refer to young people, I'm talking about those 13 to 26 years old is what most people consider young people. Sometimes they say 15 to 26, but usually 26 is where we consider the line between a young person and a person. I call them adults or older adults because when you say it's young adults and then it's what? Adults? I don't know. Anyways, so there are some things to consider about that. So we are going to spend this time together. I have a lot of information, but I also have questions for you. And I hope that y'all will participate and we can have a conversation. I know some stuff, but I know far from everything there is to know. And I really, really value what other people bring to the conversation and the work that they do, especially I'm not the only one who has young people in their life, right? We all have young people in our lives, whether we've worked with them or we just have them. So, I really encourage you to participate. So, where we are headed, we are in the middle of introductions and agenda. I'm actually only going to introduce myself. Please do introduce yourselves in the chat if you feel so inclined so we can see who else is in the room. It's always wonderful to see all the different things that we bring to the table. So if you want to share a quick, I'm from here, this is what I do. I would love to see that, but for the sake of time, we're not going to do sort of regular full introductions. The first thing we're going to talk about is just the developmental stages, like what makes a young person a young person? How are they different? What's the growth stage that they're in? We'll talk a little bit about how there are a lot of similarities between young people, and people who are really new in their recovery process. We'll talk about the role of family because that looks different for young people than it does often for older adults. We're going to look at definitions and language and sort of framing around substance use and recovery, because again, that's something to think about with young people. We'll talk about recovery capital, and I like to call it wellness capital. Not everybody wants recovery in the ways that we define it, which again is related to the one before that, the definitions and language. And so I've kind of started calling it wellness capital with young people and looking at overall wellness. And then we're going to end with just a little talk about bias. And I think that's really important because I think we make a lot of assumptions about young people. I think that it can be challenging to see them in the same way that we see them that we see other people, older adults, um, and whether there's some bias in there that may be impacting the way that we support them. Any questions on where we're going? All right. So, I would just love to hear if there's anybody who wants to just answer the question, if when you think of coaching young people or working with young people, what comes up for you? Do you have any fears that come up?
I can go.
Sure.
Um, I have fears because it almost seems unimaginable to me. I am in recovery from mental health and addiction of many different substances. Um, and when I meet young people, I just can't believe I could have done it that young. And so I want to be hopeful and helpful, but it would seem like such a journey. So I'm excited to learn more so I don't feel so afraid to use my experience and passion in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I remember looking at my 12-year-old and saying, oh my gosh, I was already using. She was such a baby, right? And I was already using at that age, as a lot of the people that we'll encounter will have started at that age. What else? Anybody else? Please.
I wouldn't say like I necessarily have fears because I myself was a young person, in recovery, started at a very young age. But I think whenever I look at my own experience, I don't think I was heard, that or actually given the choices. Nobody listened to me really on what I needed or what I was saying I needed or wanted. And so I think, now that I do recovery coaching and, I'm a trainer and stuff, I think even with my own son, I try to give him the choice whenever I can, giving him that, okay, we've talked about playing a variety of games. I've mentioned a couple, you don't seem to like those. What would you like to do? And that's not even like a big thing related to addiction, but I think it's still the same concept in all areas of life. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Khalees. I know for myself that when I started treating my daughter like a resource, it radically changed our relationship. She was 14 when I took Recovery Coach Academy. And the questions that you were asking making me think about, giving them choice, giving them some decision-making power, and treating them like they may know something. And I think we'll talk about it when we get to the bias piece, but are we truly able to treat young people as a resource? Go ahead, Sam. I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of just talk, I guess, in stream of thought, because, it's funny, there's the lived experience piece on my end, and then there's, working with a young adult population. The population I work with now is 16 and 17. That's it. It's just in that 2-year range. Some will roll over into 18, but also working with 18 to 24 for a period of time here. There's such a contrast, I think, with younger people to the degree that they've chosen to initiate treatment. I know for me, when I was 16 and 17 years old, and most of the young people I see, treatment wasn't an opportunity. It was a penance. It was a punishment. It was a purgatory. I've done something wrong, and therefore I'm punished with a duration of time where I'm stuck sober. Like it was not, there was no positive connotation to that. It was, I'm in trouble. And the punishment was really being stuck with me. And the degree that I wasn't able to carry the weight of individual responsibility. So it was like the excuses and justifications and the blame for life circumstances, families, all of that stuff. So, I think that, and we'll probably talk about this with the bias piece, but I think the biggest piece is that, when I think of like this gift that I want to give this young person staying sober, they don't a lot of times want to open that gift. Their perception of recovery at a young age is not my perception of the opportunity that's in front of them. So kind of finding the spokes on the wheel that they're willing to look at and make adjustments. So That's why I'm really happy to be here, because anything that helps speak the language and try to help open some of those doors is super helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, you bring up some really key points. And I just met a 15-year-old at a recovery high school the other day, and he's like, I didn't want recovery, but I'm getting it,
Right.
And you can make what you want of that, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it was what was true. He's like, I'm forced to be here. I don't want this, but I'm getting it somehow anyway.
Yeah. So while you're stuck sober, what can we get done? Right.
Yeah. All right, Sandy.
Hi,
Or
this is
Brennan,
Allison.
whatever.
Yeah, no worries.
Allison, go ahead.
One of the things that that we're seeing here that I hadn't really taken into account is with younger people getting sober right now, so many of them have spent so much time in recovery-based institutions that they're not necessarily maturing as fast as they might otherwise have. And having expectations that they'll meet certain levels of maturity and be able to thrive in certain settings, and just seeing them kind of miss those milestones has been really eye-opening and interesting, and on my part has required a lot more patience and tolerance than I was expecting of it. I've only been sober 15 years, but in that span of time, like the increase in institutionalization has just been really a stark contrast. So that's something that I've noticed.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up as well. Yeah, I think we're going to look at I know, Michael, only 15 years. I'd say that's significant, but you can define that for yourself. But yeah, looking at developmental stages, and that they're not necessarily where you would expect them to be. And that's where we're going to start today, is looking at these developmental stages. So we're just going to kind of do an overview of some of the categories of development and where young people are. And I want to also give this caveat that we're talking about young people. 13 to 26 is a massive range. A 13-year-old and a 26-year-old are wildly different people. And so we're talking in broad strokes here, and sort of doing the best that we can to give some specifics, but also understanding that we're talking about a big different range here, and people mature at different rates. So the most important thing I'd say, where the starting point is just the brain. I think it's probably pretty well known that our brain doesn't stop growing until we're 26, which is why I think we categorize the young people in that way. So that executive functioning part of your brain, the front of your brain, is where you make all your sort of logical decisions, where you use reasoning, and your sort of more higher level thinking happens. And that does not fully mature until 26 under normal circumstances. And so, that part of the brain is responsible for kind of putting the brakes on the other stuff that's happening: stress response, trauma response, fear responses, emotions. All of those things are like, I need this, I need this, I need this. And the front part of the brain is saying, whoa, we got to prioritize and make good decisions. So that's not fully developed in this age group. They're also just learning to think hypothetically. So it's called metacognition, the ability to think ahead of what might happen. If this, then this might happen, or what they call what if thinking. So that is still in development at this age. They are wired for risk taking. So this is one of those things that I think about. We often punish adolescents in particular, and young adults as well, for what we see as making risky decisions, when they're actually wired for risk taking. it's part of the growth process. It's part of the sort of breaking away from the family, becoming one's own person, and just trying things out. So they are built for risk taking. And then emotional regulation. They have less time that they've managed to sort of figure out how to go from I feel this and it's huge to I can come back down to center and be grounded again. So that emotional self-regulation is less developed. And therefore, we talk about like they're drama queens, or they're so dramatic, or everything's such a big deal. And it really is. It really genuinely is. And that's because they're still learning to regulate that for themselves. Relationships and identity. So big changes are happening in the relationships and identity aspect of growth and development. Hormones, we all remember, I would guess, how powerful those are and how they have such a strong influence. And again, it's kind of like that regulation thing where real like figuring out how to handle the big feels and the big hormones. One of the most important things about that relationship and identity piece is identity formation. So young people are starting to see themselves as more separate from family, and they're breaking away from family, and they're looking to figure out who they are, their sense of self, as well as where they belong and where they fit. And I think of it as like they're out looking for their chosen family. So as they're forming this ego and identity and sense of self separate from family and others, they're also developing deeper relationships with peers. They have a strong need for attachment, and those peer relationships are incredibly important to them. In terms of their life circumstances, they have way less control over their own lives, way less control over their own lives than we would, as sort of a normal, healthy adult. The parents, will still have a very prominent role, as well as just social structures. We keep, young people are sort of more participating in social structures over which they don't have a lot of input over how those social structures go, like school, sports teams, hobbies, and even when you think about the types of work that young people would be doing, often it's unskilled or entry level. And those workplaces can be very, very structured, and they have very little control over their schedule or who they're working with or what task they have to do. They may not have been given a lot of opportunity to make decisions, so they may not even know how to make independent decisions. And I would say that more and more where, that idea of helicopter parenting, or, everything's so structured, and I think that, less and less our young people have practice making decisions, because they're not allowed to make a lot of decisions. And so we can't expect them to know how to do that in some cases. And then they just may be lacking in life experience, right? They just haven't done a lot of stuff or been a lot of places. And when I think about the young people I worked with the first 4 years that I was coaching, I mean, there was so many things, like they didn't know how to do laundry. I had one young woman who was 20, and I'd been coaching her for a while, and she smelled, she had a body odor. And it took me a while, but when I felt like we had the relationship for it, I asked her, oh, does she have all the hygiene products that she needs? And she said, yeah, I just need shampoo. And I said, oh, do you need soap? And she said, no, I don't need soap. I just need shampoo. And it turns out that she thought that she just poured the shampoo on her head, and it kind of like ran down the rest of her body, and that was adequate bathing. She did not understand that soap was a separate thing that she needed to do for her body. So, we don't know what they don't know. And they probably don't know a lot of what they don't know, just like us as adults do. I don't know a lot of things that I don't know. And so just never assuming that those basic skills are there. And then in terms of substance use, so a lot of this comes from the Recovery Research Institute. that the studies have shown they tend to use multiple substances and a wider variety of substances. So if you think about the synthetics, there's so many synthetic drugs out there, and young people are much more sort of connected to those and have access to those and are willing to try those. I just learned at the Recovery High School last week that there is something called DMT, which is, I guess, a thing that your brain makes when you're going to sleep. But if you have the synthetic form of it, it makes you hallucinate. Like if you think about dreaming, it kind of makes you like dream while you're awake. So this is one of, so many things that that are out there that young people are using. Not all of them have substance use disorder. And I think for myself as a coach, it's easy for me to make an assumption that if somebody's sitting across from me, they have substance use disorder, period. But the reality is that a lot of them may be experiencing serious problems or consequences, but not actually meet the diagnostic criteria, and not have, what we consider like a full, moderate or severe substance use disorder. They are often forced or coerced into treatment. They seek or express desire for abstinence or recovery less often than older adults do. And substance use and using habits, as well as recovery maintenance and return to use, is more influenced by peers and social pressures. So those are some of the considerations or sort of developmental stages for young adults. And I want to just bring up the next slide, and then we'll check in with everybody. When we talk about what I sort of coined as people young in recovery, when thinking about this webinar and creating this, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's so many of these qualities that are the same for people who are young in recovery, people who are early in their recovery journey. So when we look at folks who are, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, if they've been using substances for a long time, or they've had trauma in their earlier lives, often those developmental stages are delayed. And so they may present with a lot of the same behaviors or things going on. The big feels, the strong emotions, the heightened hormones, right, are happening for people in early recovery. They may not have developed good self-regulation, emotional regulation. They may not have had a chance to let their brain fully develop in the executive functioning area, and therefore they can have poor impulse control. They may have less of a sense of self, less developed ego and identity as separate from others, and they have that deep need for attachment and relationships. And so, often that's called arrested development. And so we'll see a lot of the same things present. Whereas for the young people, as their normal developmental stages, and for people young in recovery who are older, it's less normal. But it's normal for that group, right? So just an acknowledgement of that. So anybody have any questions or comments about that information? All right. So let's talk about the role of family. Just getting all my stuff, all my screen stuff going. All right, so the role of family looks a little bit different often, not all the time. Again, all of these are generalizations, right? So they may not always be true, but are often true. So for young people, the parental involvement is often much more prevalent and prominent. And just in general in their lives, they are still very connected to older adults, like extended family members, teachers, coaches, other types of mentors, maybe it's clergy, youth group. So they tend to have a lot of adults that they have relationships with. Certainly when folks have been, they may have alienated or broken off a lot of those relationships, depending on how far into the development of their problematic substance use they are. But generally speaking, parents can still be the closest relationship that a young person has, particularly the adolescents. And so parents will have a very active role in their young person's life. And a lot of times their opinions can carry great weight. So when you're working with a young person and they have a decision to make, the parent may have a lot of input or involvement in that decision making. So bottom line with that is they often have less control, or other adults have a lot of influence on them, but that also means that they have a lot of support. And as we know, many people who have a more developed substance use disorder, we lose a lot of those relationships. And so we may not have a lot of support. My parents were with me probably the first 5 years, and then the next 15, they were like, yeah, we can't help you. We love you, but we can't help you. I think it's not unusual that we lose people along the way and don't have that support. So it's one of the advantages for young people that they often still do have that kind of support. So when we talk about coaching with parent involvement, this is something that I think can be challenging or seen as a challenge, and it can be challenging, but it also can be a huge asset. In the model that I coached in originally, I would have a young person who was my recovery, and then there would be one parent designated as sort of the family member. And so we would have regular family meetings with all of us. And then I also would be available to that parent on a regular basis, which meant ultimately that I was coaching the mom or dad as well. It was typically the mom, but there were some dads. So family coaching is a really powerful tool, and it's a wonderful thing. We just have to consider where our alliance is and sort of, what the two relationships look like. But it can be really powerful to help support both as they, as the parent is learning to support their young person. So I have one particular recovery, Michaela. She said it was okay if I used her name. I started coaching her when she was 19. I still coach her now. She's 25 and has 4 years, which is amazing. But I've been working with her mom, Kathy, that whole time as well. And in the early days, Kathy was not helpful. Kathy had her stuff. And Kathy was very mad. And she had a hard time being in a role that was helpful to Michaela. And so over the years, I worked with both Michaela and with Kathy. And Kathy, I don't have the words to say how different she is today. And she just, was willing and teachable and coachable, not even teachable, but coachable. And she really has been, she's a radically different mom today. And to sort of, to know that I was able to not just support Michaela, but support Michaela by supporting Michaela's mom is really powerful. So that the parents can be huge allies and huge supports, but they may need some help in being that. So, and again, this depends on the model that you're working in. So your organization may support that, or they may have very clear boundaries about that. I would say that anytime, whether you're coaching the parent or the parent is not part of your coaching milieu, but they're in, they're around, clear boundaries are incredibly important in this. Beginning by saying, this is what these are the boundaries, these are the expectations. The biggest thing that would always come up, and again, I'll use Michaela as an example. I've been coaching her so long. I have so many examples from coaching Michaela. There were things that she would not want her mom to know. So she would tell me because we had a trusting relationship, but she wouldn't want her mom to know. And so then for me as a coach, it was, how do I navigate like what needs to be known and what does not? And so, there's a lot of ethical considerations in that and boundaries, but the most important thing is to set those boundaries at the beginning. Young people don't trust older adults as easily as some others may. And we'll talk about that a little bit more further on. But they're used to having adults be sort of in a more controlling or I'm better than you, we're not equals kind of a role, that it's hard for them to trust that older adults really truly have their best interests at heart and respect them and that they are trustworthy. So it's really important to establish those boundaries at the beginning. For me, what that looked like was telling Michaela that I won't tell your mom things that you don't want me to tell her unless they directly relate to your safety. So when she told me that she was pregnant and she said, don't tell my mom. And I said, Michaela, I have to tell your mom at some point. However, I'm going to give you X amount of time to do it yourself. If you don't tell your mom at the end of, I probably gave her like 10 days or 2 weeks or something, then I will share that information with her. And what I did was just support Michaela in getting to the point where she felt like she could talk to her mom. She needed time to think about the decisions she had to make and all of this, and then she eventually told her mom. So keeping them centered and as the resource and as you being their ally is important, and just establishing what those things are. And man, her mom always wanted to know what was going on. And I had to often say, you'll have to ask Michaela, because the boundary was so important that in order for me to sort of do that work with Michaela, she needed to trust me. So I want to stop for a moment and just check in. I know there's a wealth of experience in the room, and I've covered a lot of stuff. So anybody have any thoughts or experience to add or examples to this, what we just talked about? Go ahead, please.
I'm just saying, have you been talking to my mama? Because I feel like you're just talking about my life right now, like in all of this stuff. I just think I just think the information you gave about young people, and we used to joke that I was a drama train running through all the time. And it is really interesting because I'm 28, I'm 28. And so when you were talking about 26, like I was thinking about myself 2 years ago, and just even then like seeing the difference though. But also my mom was very active in my recovery journey. She always has been from the very beginning. And there are definitely, for us, something that really saved us was whenever I left rehab, we had a conversation, and it was like, I wrote a letter of permission. So I'm giving you permission that these are the signs that you will see whenever I'm acting out. These are the behaviors. This is what I tend to do. And I'm giving you permission to call me out on these behaviors when you start to notice them. And something I remember once, whenever my mom was doing a training and she had to get some coaching hours, and so she was doing a lesson about why you shouldn't coach your family. So she did a thing with me, and she was like, and see, this is why we don't coach our family. But like, even then, in our house, we say that's less than ideal all the time. My son even says it now. So just like the importance of having family support, but also the boundaries. I think you made like a really good point in that, because I know there's some things that just my mom doesn't need to get her feelings hurt, or she carries the weight of that stuff that's not necessary sometimes for her to be carrying the weight of, or I can unleash all those things on her. And so it's good to, I don't know, just the boundary piece was really, really stuck out to me too. Really good though, really interesting. And it's like I'm seeing my life just through your slides. So
Good. I'm getting a couple of things right anyways.
yeah.
And Khalees, you're such a wonderful young person in recovery, and such an asset. I would love to see like an army of young people in recovery, right? And defined as they want to, right? Not by our definition, but by theirs. But the amazing work that they can do with each other, right? Because I'm sitting here talking about coaching young people. I'm not a young person, right? I'm 49 years old. I have a 21-year-old. And so how cool would this webinar be if we had a 24-year-old, right, leading this and teaching us how to work with young people. And so like that's the dream for me, is to just see us have so many young people who are living at the quality of life that they desire, living lives of wellness and good health, and you know, organized together to help others, you know. And there, that does exist to some degree. Certainly, I'm not diminishing. There's a lot of amazing work being done by young people, but I would love to see even more. So,
And I think the point you made about the older person, I found that a lot of young people gravitate towards me too, because like that are 18, 19, 25, 26, because they're like, I'm not some grandma trying to coach them or talk to, not that you're a
you
grandma.
call me a grandma.
No, not that you're a grandma, but just it's kind of like I speak their language, you know, even like the language, you know, we talk about terminology and stuff. Like I'm like, you know, I was just on a coaching session and she was talking about music and I was like, oh, is that a banger? You know, their UK slang. Is that a banger? And she's like, yeah, like, and that's it. It's just I'm not going to go to, and I even thinking about it, like I have felt myself not wanting to disclose information because of the age difference or something whenever I was like getting into recovery. So I can see it is that good to have people who are younger coaching younger people. Not that you're doing it wrong or anything like that. Just they relate more to it.
Yeah, thank you. And in the meantime, right, we are all very, very capable of coaching young people, and our approach to it can make a real difference in whether they can connect with us or not. And that, you know, brings me really beautifully into this concept about language and definitions. So I'm going to share with you some quotes. I went to the Recovery High School. I love the Recovery High School. I have one 15 minutes from my house. And I've been, as they call me, a huge friend of Independence Academy for probably 8 years now. But I love going there and I love talking to the students. And so I went last week and I said, if somebody asked you why you're at a recovery high school, what would you say? How do you describe your relationship to substances? What do you consider recovery? So I just asked them, you know, how do you define things and what language do you use? So these were some of the things that they kind of came up with. I have a harm reductive outlook. I'm not ready for abstinence. I just have, and you know, this is verbatim, I just have not a great relationship with substances. Right. So that person did not identify as having substance use disorder. I'm just trying to get a healthier relationship with substances. I probably shouldn't have substances, but I don't want long-term sobriety, like lifelong. And that was a 15-year-old who just spent 4 months in an inpatient treatment program and is now at the Recovery High School. My intention is not to be fully sober, but just to cut down, and I would call that recovery. I'm going to try to reach full abstinence, but right now I'm on MAT and smoking weed, and I'm in recovery. So how do you feel about those? Are they challenging to accept?
Sounds like every teenager in treatment, you know. That's pretty much like the potpourri of teenagers that we have here. Every so often, I as a group will say to them and remind them that, you know, our intention is, or I you know, I'm usually speaking individually, so I'll say my intention is not for you to stay sober when you leave here. That is not my ultimate goal. One of the things that may be your intention, I'd be happy to help you open that door if you'd like to do that. I said, but really the goal here is for you to have options that you didn't have when you arrived. The goal here is for you to have choices that you didn't have when you arrived, and to maybe open some doors that you had been closing, or maybe become aware of some doors that are open for you. And that the biggest thing that I'd love for you to be able to do in your time with us is to build a vision and build an ideal of the young adult that you aspire to be. If you haven't ever done that before, you get to do that while you're here, where, you know what, substances are on a shelf for a little while, life is paused for a little while. So let's help you develop that vision, and if you haven't, maybe take a look at some of the barriers, the fears, the insecurities, the self-doubts that have blocked you from building that vision, because adulthood is coming to a theater near you, right? So, I always say that, for the 16 and 17-year-olds, like, whether you want it to happen or you don't want it to happen, it's coming. And for all of us that are not young people anymore, it's fast. I always say it's faster than you think. And I feel like the way that I've really tried to focus on staying capable of working with young people. I don't know how capable I remain, at 45, the same as you, Meghann. Like, I have my own now where I'm like, I don't know that I can talk that language. What I try to do with the lived experience piece is just really bring it back to and always remind myself the thoughts, feelings that I had during that period of time, and try to bring it back there. Is that my experience with the world was much different at 16 and 17 than it is now. And all the things you talked about in early slide, the metacognition and all that stuff was really super helpful, right? It's just a constant reminder of like, well, how would a 16, I keep saying the age that's here, but how does a young person perceive this information that's happening? Not how I would perceive it as a 45-year-old and thinking they should know better, That was really helpful. I like that. What is the definition of that? The metacognition?
Metacognition. So yeah, I would have to look it up to give you a formal definition, but it's basically like meta means you're able to sort of step outside of your immediate experience and think about something from another perspective. So metacognition is that ability to not just make decisions based on what's already happened to me, but to make a decision based on what might happen. So it's being able to say a what if. That if I do this, then this might happen. And it was kind of mind-blowing to me as I was researching this, to really like understand that before adolescence, people can't do that. Do you know what I mean? So when you're like when you're negotiating with, a 10-year-old about something, they don't have that skill set of saying, well, if, because we're over here negotiating like 45 and 49-year-olds, and a 10-year-old doesn't have that ability to say, well, if this happens, then that will happen. Like, they can't think in those terms. And so with our adolescents, they're just developing that ability. So yeah, so, and I love that, not thinking about how I would perceive it, but how they might perceive it. From their worldview, from their limited life experience. Yeah, it's really good. Go ahead, Michael, and then Chris. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to like point out too, it's like the pillars, the recovery coach, like the coaching pillars, right? So we use that three-legged stool, and you have to discover and manage your own stuff off the rip, right? If you when you start having conversations with people that are younger than you, because they're gonna come at you with things that are new, and that is gonna throw you off, right? And then that change is gonna bother you, because it's like, no, that's not how just off the rip. Just be mindful of that, right? Of that three-legged stool, and just and always ask good questions. And then you'll know by asking good questions, where you can lead a young person. Because listen, that's just coaching right there. It doesn't have to go any deeper than that. It's to know and discover and manage your own stuff at that moment, after that conversation that you had. So
yeah, absolutely, Michael. And really this is just coaching.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we were all able to practice pure, excellent, high level recovery coaching at its finest all the time, we wouldn't need these webinars, right? But we're developing our crowd, we're working on it and everything. And so when we think about how do I perfectly execute the three-legged stool? Well, I can't do perfect, but if I'm working with the young people, what are the pieces I'm looking for, right? What's the stuff I have to manage in this particular group, or this kind of a person or whatever that I'm working with. And yeah, I mean, the three legs of the stool and the seat, treating people as a resource, actively listening, asking good questions, and discovering and managing my own stuff is all throughout this information that I'm presenting. And there are actually, hopefully, we'll have time to get to have some good questions. I have a couple of slides of just what are some good questions to ask, and what are some sort of approaches to think about, because it's really about our attitudes more than anything, I think, right? It's really about our belief systems and our attitudes towards young people that matter the most in the way that we interact with them, in the way that they perceive us. And I think I can't stress enough how treating them as a resource is probably the most important thing to think about when we're working with young people, because it's so easy for us not to do that with them, because we think, oh, they don't have a lot of life experience, blah, blah, blah. All right, let's hear from Chris.
I was just thinking about a lot of those answers were very like in the harm reduction realm, right? And so we have like, it's really hard if you're in recovery and in harm reduction to find a community of people like you can in abstinence-based recovery. And so I'm just thinking that as we're talking about, like, the kids are going to be the future, which they always are, but maybe they're going to be the ones that define how recovery communities look moving forward, or create their own communities, or how we might be able to foster recovery communities that are based not only on abstinence only, and how to integrate those, because abstinence only people can be really hard to be with the harm reduction people, and then I was thinking about the meta thing, and I could be wrong, but as the youth get older, I was taught to think about it like dominoes. So like they might be able to get the first reaction, but not all of the ones down the line. So like at first, like at 10, they don't see that there's a domino, and then like at 12, they might see 2 dominoes, so it's helping them see the whole line of dominoes for what the actions or their consequences could be. I could be completely wrong about that, but I feel like that's that.
I love it. I love that. That's a beautiful metaphor. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. And then I just have one question. When we were talking about Michaela and her pregnancy, and did you say you started coaching her at 19 and she's 24 now? And so I guess the question is, when it comes to revealing things to her mother, if it was more like Lacey said, like the partnership, because normally I wouldn't be able to say like, hey, she's an adult, I can't tell her mom that she's pregnant. Like I have no authority to do that. So how did that relationship work? I was just curious.
Yeah, so you bring up so many things I'd love to talk about. So in terms of answering your question about Michaela, because Michaela at 19 was not a normal 19, or a typical 19, therefore the sort of agreed engagement looked different, right? So she's a 19 who at that point in time was living, her substance use was highly fatal, right? Has a high potential for fatality. She had no recovery capital or sort of overall wellness at all. She was completely dependent on family and or whatever program she happened to be in. And so the rules of engagement were different for someone like that at 19. And again, it's all mutually agreed. So it's, set up right from the beginning. So it is, I can imagine it feels like for a 20-year-old or a 22, you're going to tell my mom stuff. And I'm like, unfortunately, yeah, at this point, I want you to grow into being able to make amazing decisions for yourself, keep yourself safe and all of that. But right now, you need a little support in doing that. And this is what that support looks like. Yeah. The other piece too for that particular model is mom's paying, right? Mom's providing the service, and I do have an obligation. There has to be some fidelity to the fact that this is something that mom is asking me to do. And therefore, right, I have some responsibilities to mom, and I have some to Michaela. And that's why coaching young people can say, that's why those boundaries are so important. So the clarity around who does what my role is, how it works with each of them, is incredibly important. And I saw the question in the chat, 19 isn't considered an adult. I don't know if you mean legally or not, but I think, we have what would be like typical or normal consideration of who an adult would be. But when we have young people with problematic substance use, that sometimes looks different. It sometimes looks different. And so that can be sort of defined on a more individual basis, or it will be defined by the organization that you're working with. So do Vince and then Khalees. Go ahead, Vince.
So do you have experience, or can you talk about those boundaries, but in relation with the multi-generational approach to family addictions and coaching youth to talk to Uncle Bob, or I mean these patterns run in families, and there's resources there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be sure that I'm answering what you're asking. I think what I'm hearing you talk about is what the rest of the family unit may not be the best supports. And so navigating, when you're, am I getting that right, Vince?
No, I'm thinking that, Michaela's mom went through this herself. I mean, she actually experienced, I mean, her aunt, went through this, and they have coaching that they could do to support Michaela, because these patterns aren't unique to one person. They run in families.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there are amazing resources that would be dedicated to the family members, because you're absolutely right. They have all their own stuff that's going on as well, whether it's just in relation to their own recovery process because of their loved one, because of their child's problems with substance use, but also, they may have all their own stuff. They may have their own problems with substances, or they may have their own problems with trauma, challenges and whatnot. And so I think it's incredibly important, and that is definitely a big part of what I do when if I have both a young person and a key adult in the family, that I strongly encourage that family to access their own resources for their own wellness. And really, my coaching for the parent is directly in relation to how they interact with the young person, sort of, what I mean, to try to keep it in that narrow lane where, but y'all need to go and get your help, because that's critical. And the way that I usually talk about it is that if you want to best help Michaela, you're going to help yourself. And I'm not your person to do that. I can help you understand the disease of addiction. I can help you understand what the recovery process might look like, or different stages or phases of that, or whatever. But they definitely need to get their own support beyond that.
I guess I'm more looking at the thing where, Michaela's mom's older sister would be able to say, been there, done that, this is how this is going to work out. And just being a role model for how, surviving some of this developmental stuff that tends to be in patterns in families. So that Michaela doesn't feel so isolated from the family. I mean, the people I work with, they're every brother in the family is addicted, and they're in different places. Can we talk with them and look and use them as a resource?
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I understand you. Yeah. I think in an ideal way that would be, I think it depends on sort of what the model you have is, and whether you have the resources as a coach to sort of, do that broader work in the family, and help identify others who may be supports and all of that. I mean, I think, that if I'm supporting Michaela in finding other people in her life who could be supportive of her recovery, right? That would be like a conversation that would come up as a result of that. So yeah, no, I think it is, your point is important to recognize that there may be other people that can be supportive to that as well. So I want to talk about sort of going back to this idea of what I call self-defining the problem. And we started to talk about this a little bit, right? So definitions and systems created for adults don't always fit for young people. Newsflash. I think a lot of our policymakers and our purse holders and our system designers kind of assume that if I build something that works for adults, then it's going to work for young people. And honestly, if we're talking about the treatment industry, I would question whether it even works that well for adults, but that's just me. So many young people don't have a diagnosis of substance use disorder, but they may have a lot of consequences of substance use. So I'll say that again, many young people may have a lot of consequences from substance use and still not be diagnosable as having substance use disorder. And many young people do not like the label of substance use disorder for all kinds of reasons. Either it just doesn't feel like a good fit because they don't have substance use disorder, because they're not ready to admit they have substance use disorder, or because that's just a really clinical term. And I would say if you're a 15-year-old, like it's a bummer to have a label, like a clinical label of I have a substance use disorder. Like, right, that's a hard sort of costume to put on, right? A hard skin to walk in as a young person for anybody, but especially as a young person. So as you saw in some of those quotes, substance use disorder is not a label that a lot of young people want to use. And if they don't want to use the label substance use disorder, they might not be trying to get something called recovery. So even though we think, we've got this thing, we have this like broad definition of recovery, it's still recovery. And there's still a lot of connotations that come with the word recovery. And it may not be, and because we have sort of a dominant culture of what recovery looks like, and we can say we have broad definitions of, we all have different definitions, but the reality is that the dominant culture of the recovery movement brings with it a definition of recovery, which is primarily abstinence-based. And so having a more limited definition of recovery can alienate young people. They don't identify with that. And the idea of lifelong abstinence is very unappealing. So knowing that what we've created that works for older adults, or it works for the majority, does not fit well with young people, we need to find something else. And I would ask you to consider embracing some different language, like a person with problematic substance use, a person experiencing chaotic substance use, a person experiencing negative consequences from substance use. And on the flip side, a person seeking a healthy relationship with substances, a person seeking to reduce substance use, or a person seeking increased wellness. I'm bringing this up in the young people, sort of, framing what we would easily, loosely call addiction and recovery, right? But framing it for young people. But I think that this is incredibly important for everybody. And I love, Chris, that you brought up harm reduction, because, harm reduction is becoming sort of more embraced as a philosophy and a mechanism of supporting people. And this really is like a harm reduction outlook on it. I do not define for anybody else what their relationship with substances is or should be. I cannot define for anybody else what their relationship with substances is or should be. And I think that's incredibly important for young people. So we do not walk into that space and into that relationship thinking we already know what the problem is and what the solution is. Go ahead, Chris.
Have you asked, and this is just a question because I always have a problem with our changing, well, not necessarily our changing use of language, but changing language into something that doesn't seem any more helpful than it was before. Like those sentences, all still very, very clinical. And if I told my niece that, she would be like, that is not, no. You know what I mean? Like none of that. So like asking the youth how they want us to talk to them about it. Like what in the people that are working with youth regularly, how do they define it? Because a person with chaotic substance use disorder, you know, like that would never come out of a teen's mouth.
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you, Chris, and I take that point and second it. And I think what the difference is so I titled the slide, right, self-defining the problem or the solution, because we have to have a language. We can't not have a language. And if everyone has a different way to say something, then we don't understand each other. So we've got to have something to kind of hang on to a little bit. And we do have to label things and categorize things in some way. And I think we're in a really big, and this is a whole nother webinar, I think we're at a really big turning point in terms of our language does need to change. And even substance use disorder is limited and outdated at this point in time. It's great for clinical people. It doesn't work for the rest of us necessarily. So we're in this big shift and turning point in the recovery movement of how do we talk about this? How do we talk about this? And so I think that you know, the examples on that slide are like the best that we can do when we're talking about it in general terms, right? So I don't come in and say to a young person, I think you have chaotic substance use, right? But if I'm talking in a room full of people, like I was the other day at the Recovery High School, and I'm speaking generally, I might say, you know, so people who you know, have problematic substance use, blah, 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 right? Or, you know, hey, if you've got if it's chaos when you use substances, right? What does it look like on the other side of that, or whatever conversation I'm having? So I feel like it's like the best we can do, right? To have a common understanding amongst each other, but to your point, absolutely letting them say what it is for them, and then always using that language with them. Because we haven't figured out how to do that. We haven't figured out how to do that. Khalees.
I'm coaching a girl and she's 24 and she doesn't want to be attached to the word recovery because that is very much abstinence focused. And I was like, well, what does that look like for you? She's like, I just want to improve my life. And I'm like, that's great. You know, that's great. And she's like, I want to do better. I want to make movement. I want to accomplish the things I say I want to accomplish. Where do we start? You know, that's it. And for her, it's so simple. I just want to live a better life. Is that okay? Yes, we don't have to use the word recovery. That's fine. Yeah. And I think sometimes us in our clinical brains, we can try to just make things way more complicated than what they have to be. Like she just wants to improve her life. That's great. Period.
I love it. Yeah, I wholeheartedly embrace that too. How can we improve your quality of life? Right? Which brings us to, yeah, this is great because every time we're on something, then you all just like bring us to the next piece, right? So if we're not walking this sort of narrow, you have substance or just use disorder, you need traditional recovery, then what does it look like? What does it look like? So when we talk about recovery capital, I actually like to call it something else, but let's I can get the thing to go. Okay. If we're not talking about those limited definitions, then do the pathways that we have fit? Do they work? Right? How many young people do you see in your own pathway? How many young people do you actually see showing up at whatever your pathway is? And if they're not there, then where are they? So much of what we have is built for adults again, and it's built for moderate to severe substance use disorder, right? Inpatient treatment. The kid that the 15-year-old, he overdosed on Benadryl, was sent to inpatient treatment for 4 months, and now is in recovery high school indefinitely. Was that the appropriate approach for him? I don't know. I don't have that enough information, but could it potentially have not been the right approach for him? Could there have been other things that could have been done that weren't so abrupt and extreme? I would say, yeah, there probably could have been some other things considered in that case. So that automatic, you're using substances, you're having consequences, you got to go to detox, you got to do inpatient, you got to go to recovery home, you have to be abstinent, doesn't always work. So what do we have that's outside of that? Most of our pathways are built with adults in mind, and most of them are built with traditional definitions of recovery in mind. Some people, young people, that works great, and some it doesn't. So where are they, and where do they go? And so that brings me to recovery capitals, right? So, when we're looking at what are the things that are going to support somebody, we generally refer to those as recovery capital. And I would say with young people, we could perhaps just talk about wellness capital. How can we get you more well? Like, how can we improve your quality of life? What does wellness look like to you? I would suggest that you can decentralize substance use. And this again is also a harm reduction approach of like, maybe it doesn't always just have to be about stopping the substance, because maybe the substance is the way that person has survived some really tough things in their lives. And when we ask them to not change anything else, but just take out the substance, right? And everything else is a disaster. They still have all those other challenges. It's not always realistic. And therefore, when we work with young people, a lot of the times you're going to find yourself working with overall wellness. At the recovery high school close to me, they have 13 dimensions of wellness. Only one of them mentions substances. 13 dimensions, only one is about substances. The young people get to choose which dimensions they're going to work on. Because if we're really truly looking at recovery capital, I would challenge you all to think about, if you happen to be a person in recovery, or if you're in recovery from anything, which I think everybody's in recovery from stuff, what do you do that supports your wellness? And would you actually call that a recovery pathway, or would you just call that things that support my wellness? Financial health, yoga, nature, nutrition, family, right? So many of us, our pathway of recovery is just a tapestry of stuff that keeps us good. So can we help young people weave together the threads to build a tapestry of wellness that isn't totally focused on the absence of substances? Particularly if they're not ready to centralize substances as the cause of all the problems, or if they're not able to remove substances at that time. Can we just support them in building capital in all areas of their lives so that substances don't need to be a big piece for them? So let's see, 210. Let's look at some, there is a really great chart here. It's from Recovery Research Institute. And I'm just going to put it up for a moment so you can have a quick look at it. The slides, I'm happy to make the slides available later if anybody wants them. But they look at capital as having 4 categories and having, these are just some examples of what might fit into these different categories of recovery capital for young people. And I think when we even sort of broaden the scope and look at wellness capital, there's so many things that could be in here. But it's a way of just kind of looking at, it's not just about the substance use, using or not using substances. It's about, you know, building opportunities for growth, having strong support, having them move in a positive direction of where they want to go. So I want to just touch on sort of just some approaches. Some of these came from, these basically came from myself and also Brittany DeRossi, who is the recovery coach for the ARMS program at Mass General Hospital in Harvard. And the ARMS program is for 13 to 20 or 15 to 26-year-olds who are having consequences from substance use, and they engage in a multidisciplinary team. So together we kind of said, all right, what are the big pieces if for coaches to think about when working with young people? Being authentic. Oh my goodness, I cannot say enough about being authentic. They can see bull crap like nobody's business. They've been treated badly or just not as a resource by so many adults in their lives. And there's been so many systems. If you think about kids who, you know, young people who have been involved in the criminal justice system, for example, like how many people in different systems have said, I just want to help you. I'm here to help you, right? But the things that they're doing do not feel helpful at all to that young person, whether that's just perception or reality. So we're coming in and we're just another adult who's like, I want to help you. And so, you know, one of the beautiful gifts about coaching is we get to be real. We get to just be people. And so being authentic is incredibly powerful with young people, and also being trustworthy. Because again, a lot of adults have proven to not be trustworthy in those relationships. I'm not going to talk about all of them because of time, but think of them as a whole person and not just their problem, right? They are more than just the problem they're presenting with, and a lot of them have been labeled for years. Listen to what they're actually saying, and not what you want them to say or what you think they're going to say or what you're hoping they're saying, but actually really truly listen, and be aware of your own judgment creeping in, which goes for all coaching. But when you think about young people, right, they're judged constantly. They're judged by their parents, they're judged in school, they're judged in sports, they're probably, a lot of them, judged by the justice system, which for young people in anybody might be the criminal injustice system. But so in every area of their lives, they're being measured, graded, compared to each other, right? So us having no judgment is like so powerful, so incredibly powerful. Give them time to process. Don't look for immediate answers with things. Let stuff sit. You know, they may need more time to just kind of think of things through. And, you know, like I said, their brains are still growing. So let things sit. Allow them to have a sense of self-control. Give them opportunities to practice decision making. They're going to change their minds a lot because they're exploring. You know, part of their mission, part of their job as young people is to explore and grow their worldview. And so let them change their minds. If they say something and you're like, oh my gosh, on one day, just let it go. See if it comes again, right? Because they might have a totally different attitude or say something completely different the next day. Again, I can't say enough about allowing them to make decisions, and trusting that they can make good decisions. And don't get stuck on substance use. some good questions. What would you like me to know about you? Not starting with I need to know these things about you, but what do you want me to know? And what would the peers who know you the best say about you? Not what your mom would say, but you could ask that question, I suppose. But what do your peers say about you? Because they know you better than anybody. How do you feel things are going? Because they might not think it's as bad as what, mom's freaking out because, Tommy got caught smoking pot. He's on the football team. Now he's suspended and now we're going to freak out, right? Well, maybe it's not that bad. And maybe that young person has a completely different perspective. So, really be open to what they think is going on. What kinds of challenges are you facing? I mean, there's just so many, they just have so many challenges and so many voices telling them what's wrong, that allowing them, shifting that to say, what do you think is going on? What are the biggest challenges you face in a given day? Not what everybody else thinks, but what's the hardest part of your life for you? Khalees.
I was just gonna say too, like I have a friend and she's a therapist and a counselor and she works with young people and I'm a coach. So we have some very interesting conversations. And she was saying that even this generation right now is not even equipped to deal with what our younger generation is going through because of technology now, social media. They're constantly comparing themselves. They constantly feel like they're never good enough. They're constantly thinking there's always something better out there. So the depression, the anxiety that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis as soon as they wake up. And everything is hard. Everything is a competition. Everything is just that, the thoughts in their head and everything. And I was just like, wow, that's so sad. So like when you, like, I think on your previous, like you had like authenticity and like genuine care and love and compassion. I just think it's so important in our role as a coach to make sure that we create those safe spaces where they feel that, really feel that. And they need somebody to trust and know that it doesn't matter because, what I might think is the biggest problem, somebody else might be like, really, but it doesn't matter because to me, that feels like it's really heavy or something. And just really being able to see them and say, wow, I'm sorry you're going through that. Must be hard. Like, what can we do to fix that? How can I help? And just being curious. I think curiosity is a big thing when it comes. I mean, I think curiosity is a big part of any coaching role, but when it comes to young people, I think it's really important because like you said, the age difference too. So we might not even know what feels heavy to them right now. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but
yeah,
we'll leave it there.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you. No, it's really centering them, right? Instead of what all the other things look like or are, it's really centering them. And I appreciate that. And I really like too, Juliana, what you said about, that the sort of the stigma or the norms have changed. And so young people have a much greater awareness of mental health challenges and of trauma. And so may be much more willing to talk about it than an older person may. And so that's an opportunity. One of the wonderful things that I think, we talk a lot about barriers, but do we talk enough about opportunities? That when we're encountering young people, we have such a huge opportunity to change the way to see that there is an adult who really truly values them and considers them their own best resource. And that really brings me to this last piece about bias. And I would ask you just a couple of questions. Actually, I will share the slide. Can you really embrace a definition of recovery that doesn't involve stopping substances? I know for a lot of folks that's really crazy, but it's also a reality for a lot of people, in particular young people, that stopping substance use altogether is not what wellness looks like for them. It's not what recovery is for them. And can you embrace the concept of wellness capital and working on goals that don't directly correlate to stopping substances? Decentering the substance And this is a part of a larger conversation about that it's not the drug that's the problem, right? It's the way that we use the drug. And so what you know, when we're looking at solutions and wellness and moving in a positive direction, you know, are we focusing on just holistic health and wellness? Or are we saying this is a terrible drug and you have to stop this drug, and that's what this whole thing is about, is you stopping this drug? When really we just want people to have a good quality of life. For many of us, I'm one of them, abstinence is what I needed. It also was like one of the only options. Let's get real too. Had I had another option, maybe I would have chosen another option. I certainly tried all different ways. But that's what it is for me, but only me. Right. But I fought really, really hard for that abstinence and the definition of recovery I have for myself. So it can be hard for me to embrace that some people can use substances. And they can use them in a healthy way. Even if they've had a problematic relationship with substances, they may be able to have a healthier relationship with substances. And so in the short windows that we get to have these opportunities working with young people, we can sometimes be more effective when we let go of that it has to be about substances, and we let it be about what do they want for a quality of life. And what are the areas in their lives that they're facing the most challenges? And as we help them resolve these different areas, the substance may take a back seat. And I think the biggest question here is, can you truly treat them as a resource? Can you truly treat them as a resource? Can they make good decisions? Do they know themselves better than anybody else? Can you believe in what they are capable of? And can you wholeheartedly embrace the belief that they are their own best resource and can make really good decisions for themselves? And treat them as equals. And we have a couple minutes if anybody, maybe a couple people want to weigh in on that. If you think you find that challenging, or if you really do embrace it. Are they equals? I'll say this. Do I have more life experience than my daughter does? Yes. Do I know what it feels like to be my daughter? No. Right? Do I know the thoughts and feelings? No, not like she does. And so just because I have more life experience doesn't mean that she's not my equal. I know some stuff that she doesn't know. She knows a lot of stuff I don't know. And I can much more powerfully connect with her if I just treat her like anybody else. I don't need to have this big power differential with young people, but it can be challenging. Khalees.
I was gonna say too, I like how Vince brought in the multi-generational part, because like I am part of a multi-generational family in recovery. And so for us, that looked like my stepdad getting educated. You know, my Nana went to Al-Anon meetings. Like in my and I'd asked my mom once, because people were like, do you think something changed because you had been to rehab? I'd been to rehab multiple times and stuff. And I asked my mom, and she was like, I think the thing was, I gave you a choice. You had the choice. But what she said was, I alleviated all of the options. You might not have liked all of the options, but I gave you options, which was like really interesting for me to comprehend, you know, here I am, because I think I asked her this like a couple months ago, like, what do you think was the difference? And she had given me, she said, look, you can go back out and use, but do not call me again. I'm done. This is the last time I am doing it. She said, you can go to a safe house, you can go to sober living, you can go to intensive outpatient program, you can go to rehab, you can do these and I will support you on whatever you choose. The option is yours. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. But like, ultimately I did choose something, which led to me going to recovery. But so she still gave me the power, let's say power, the choice. She just limited my options. And I just think that's really interesting because, and then too, like about the comment, like about 19, like I was a baby raising a baby. I got pregnant whenever, I had my son whenever I was 18. So for me, I wasn't even in the mind frame. I was a child still, especially since I'd been using from such a young age. And part of my mom being in my recovery journey allowed me to grow, I think. So whenever you talk about family coaching, I feel like that's really beneficial because a lot of my actions or choices based on my mom's facial expression could, you know what I'm saying, whatever that may be, could be like, oh, that's not good or something. And I still needed that guidance, that parental role in my life, even in my 20s, early 20s and still today. I still look for, what do you think? Just a sense check or something. So there's, Meghann, this could be like an 18-hour training. You realize that, right? Like,
well, Khalees, actually, so if this interests you, and if you're sort of like, I want to know more about this, or I want to develop this further, this skill set, or just explore or be in the space there. So CCAR has Recovery Coach Academy for young people. It's been revised. I did it in July with a group of people under that were 18 to 29. And then we came back and kind of said, what do we need to do with it? So it's a newly revised, very current version of Recovery Coach Academy. It's for young people who want to learn how to support other young people, as well as adults of any age who work with young people who want to support young people. It counts as a full Recovery Coach Academy, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, as well as for CCAR's RCP. If credentials are, that you need to have credit hours. It covers all of the basic recovery coach stuff. So, if you've already taken Recovery Coach Academy, it's a great way to kind of brush up, refine, get back to basics, practice, as well as a lot of stuff that's specific to young people. Or it may be that you haven't taken Recovery Coach Academy and this is the opportunity to do that. So that is out there for folks. It's online in January. And I would love to have any of you join us if you would like to. And I also want to give credit where it's due. So Brittany DeRossi, again, she's been doing this for years, working with adolescents and young adults up to age 26 who are having problematic substance use. She was a huge help. You can reach out to her if you want to know more about that program. And then the wonderful students at Independence Academy right next door to me in Brockton, Mass. Were hugely helpful as well. And you can check out more about Independence Academy. They're really paving the way for sort of a new model, a more harm reduction approach to working with young people. The Young Person Recovery Coach Academy, it's 30 hours total. So it's 20 hours in class together via Zoom and 10 hours of self-study. So it is, again, it's like a full Recovery Coach Academy would be. Thank you all for being here. I can hang out for a minute or two if like anybody has questions or comments or anything like that.